All right, good afternoon. Thank you all very much for coming to listen to our presentation on our semester's finding. I know there's a lot more exciting things you could be doing on a Friday afternoon, so we really appreciate you guys taking your time out to come listen to our presentation. My name is Albert DeGarmo. I'm a global governance, politics, and security major here at American University, and I'm a second year.
I'm Nicole Gunkel. I'm studying comparative and regional studies of Europe and trade.
Hi everyone, I'm Angela Lesnick. I am a second-year master's student in International Peace and Conflict Resolution, as well as the Graduate Certificate Program in Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies. And collectively, we are the Hungarian Innovation Practicum. So we were paired with the National Development, Research, and Innovation Office in Hungary to consult with them and to conduct some research. So specifically, we are researching technology transfer and comparing practices in both Hungary and the United States to determine some of the best practices that we're seeing, as well as current barriers in the field and some next steps that might help to promote sustainability. So many of you are probably wondering what exactly is technology transfer. So in the context of this report, we are defining it as a collaboration between the triple helix actors. So this includes private corporations, government, and academia. And really the goal is for each of these three actors to collaborate in order to bring innovation into the marketplace. So when each actor enters into this relationship, they're entering with different motivations and levels of expertise. So for instance, if we look at the universities or the governments, they're really operating to benefit society, mostly on a research level. And they're really lacking sorts of manufacturing or marketing powers because they're not producing and selling goods or services. Whereas on the other hand, companies, despite whatever they're producing or selling, their point is to really create a profit line so that they can continue producing and selling these goods. But they're really lacking most of the access to world-class research that the universities and the government can provide. So each actor is looking for something else that the other can offer, and together when they collaborate, they can bring the innovation into the marketplace. So for example, if we have a bike manufacturer who is trying to implement some sort of GPS device onto their current bike product, they could either try to develop the software themselves, which they probably don't have a lot of access to, like software and GPS research. They could either go out to the store and buy a GPS device and try and attach it to the bike, but that might not work so well either. Or they could try and outsource this project to another company, but that might be costly. Or they could do technology transfer and really try to develop the best technology for their product. So to gather our research, we interviewed companies, universities, and professionals in both Hungary and the United States. We tried to split it evenly between half and half. In Hungary, we interviewed 7 groups, varying between education, companies, as well as research. And in the United States, we had about 8, kind of varying the same. We really wanted to get an even pool of participants. So next I'm just going to move in to try and bring you up to speed on the current trends in the United States. So we saw a lot of action around technology transfer legislation around 1980. We had the Stevenson-Wilder Act as well as the Baugh-Doyle Act, and these were really implemented to kind of stimulate small business as well as to create some manufacturing jobs in the United States. And in addition, each federal agency was then allowed to create their own tech transfer office or an ORDA, and this gives them the opportunity to really tailor the technology transfer that they're doing to their office's specific needs. In 1986, we saw the Federal Technology Transfer Act, and this was to really incorporate technology transfer into government mission. Moving up to date, in 2011, President Obama issued a memorandum about the Startup America initiative, and this is really implemented to kind of overcome some of the barriers that we're seeing in the field, as well as to stimulate technology transfer. And we even have legislation as recent as 2015 with the Innovation Act that is still pending, and this is looking to protect patent rights as well as to increase transparency. So I'm going to hand it over to Nicole now. She'll try and bring you up to speed in Hungary.
So unlike in the US, Hungary has one office to deal with technology transfer. It's their National Research, Development, and Innovation Office, which is the client we are working for. They aim to create a stable framework for the coordination of research and development of innovation And they do this by providing stable funding and resources to universities, researchers, and private companies. Also, by joining the European Union, Hungary gained access to structural funds. The structural funds' main goal was to bring new EU members up to the same cohesion with old members, specifically in developing their industries. And so currently, Hungary has a few innovation initiatives. Their most recent one in 2004 was their Research Knowledge Centers, and they aim to integrate knowledge and support the development of research collaboration between the public sector and the private sector. Specifically, it looked at collaborating on funding for researchers, and it was pulling the funding from private companies and from the government. Also, by being a part of the EU, Hungary is participating in Horizon 2020. One of the initiatives of the Horizon 2020 focuses on expanding R&D and innovation in all of Europe. So as you can see, technology transfer is a priority for Europe and Hungary. So now I'm going to go into some of the research we collected throughout the interviews. This is going to mainly focus on what is working in the technology transfer market right now. So one of the first key themes we found in our interviews was the importance of networking. When interviewing a woman at the EPA, she said that technology transfer was most successful whenever colleagues could get together, either at conferences or workshops, and talk about the projects that they were working on. That's where they seemed to find the most partnerships forming. And also going hand in hand with this is fostering a human element to the technology transfer relationship. So it's not just focusing on developing the product, but also developing a human relationship between the people. So one of our participants said that whenever he feels like he's a valuable part of the partnership, rather than just hired help for a certain project, he sees that the relationship is a lot more successful and that it continues on past one project. And lastly, one of the most important things is how to maintain these relationships. When we interviewed a representative from Ericsson, he said the most important thing is a long-term vision on both sides. And so whenever a company joins a partnership, they expect it as a long-term investment, not just in the product and getting the product out, but in the students' competencies, so one day they could work for that company, or in relationships with the university so that they can partner in the future for other projects. So these are the things that worked really well. We saw that there are still barriers in the market. So one of the largest barriers we found in the US and Hungary is funding. In the US, this is the lack of adequate funding for staffing. For example, the EPA has 2 women that do all of their technology transfer for the whole organization. And they often said that they have projects coming in that they just don't have the staff or resources to be able to implement or collaborate with. In Hungary, it's a lack of consistent funding. So companies are not always sure that they are going to be able to secure grants in order to have partnerships. And whenever they aren't sure about the securing of grants, they're more limited in how many partnerships they'll take on. Also, with that is that in Hungary, whenever a company donates either technology or software to a school or university for free, they still have to pay a VAT tax on that good or service that they donated. And this kind of dissuades them from donating because they're still paying in order to give away valuable research. Another barrier we saw in Hungary was the perception of entrepreneurs. One of the company representatives said that in Hungary, an entrepreneur is seen as a rich man with a nice car, a woman, and slicked back hair. And so we realized that this perception is not helping Hungary grow in the innovation market whenever people are not aspiring to be entrepreneurs. Also, a large problem in the US and Hungary is STEM education. So there's not as much of an interest by students to go into these fields. And so right now, companies are finding that it's hard to find good engineers, but in the future, they're worried that if there's not enough good engineers now, how are they supposed to expand in the future? Where will these people come from? So the last large barrier is communication of technology transfer. So whenever a company wants to make a new product, they know that they can buy it off the shelf, they can build it themselves in-house, but they don't really know that they can work with a research lab or a university on it collaboratively. And so I think that's one of the biggest barriers, is the fact that just not enough people know that technology transfer is an option. So now I'm going to hand it over to AJ, who will talk about the next steps.
Thank you, Nicole. The next area really focused on what individuals that we interviewed felt that the system could be improved on and different actions that the actors could take. So we broke this into 3 big thematic areas. The first one was improving the system, and this is different actions that individuals within that triple helix relationship that we discussed earlier could take to possibly benefit the entire system as a whole. The first is increased communication. As we see, as a quote from Dr. Reddy Benabaka from Texas State STAR Labs, as with any relationship, communication is key. Individuals within this field are doing a poor job right now at communicating their efforts and their successes. So to be able to move forward to really make this field grow and to promote it, we need to increase the communication, not just between the actors, but also to the outside community as well. So individuals are aware of what technology they're currently researching, as well as who might be a potential partner in the upcoming future. Next was a call to action. This one was particularly noted by a few individuals in the interviews, but there is this concept that there should be one entity that should pick up the reins, whether it be the government or the private sector. However, many individuals reflected and said that if no one else is going to do it, they need to do it themselves. They need to be sending out newsletters, they need to be attending conferences, they need to be arranging conferences. So there was this very big thematic grouping of individuals thinking that they themselves should be picking up their own kind of bulk and their own networking to make sure that they're really fostering these relationships. And then next was further collaboration. One of the successes we talked about was how they really like to develop these deep, enriched relationships. However, there are some relationships that we saw in the field that were very shallow. They might just simply partner together for the simple technology transfer, developing the GPS, and then leave after the technology is transferred over to the private industry. What we really need to see this field be successful is for further collaboration, for them to collaborate with the private entity to make sure that the product is being properly implemented into the private field, or potentially even work with them in the future regarding other products, maybe different software that is going on, and to continue this relationship past just a one project idea. The next was a very large segment, and this is where a lot of individuals spent a majority of their time talking during our interviews, was what is the role of the government? What could the United States or Hungarian government be doing differently? The first was facilitation. We have this in the United States called the Federal Laboratory Consortium, which is responsible for being a hub, a central hub for information for individuals in the field to approach to maybe inquire about what technologies are being developed in universities, what potential technologies private companies are looking for, and this is something that the Hungarian government could very easily adopt to become a facilitator of these relationships, to really promote and connect the individuals in the field to one another. And if they're able to act as a central hub to really help each other connect and to foster this relationship, we're going to see a lot of new partnerships developing in the next few years. The next was creating an attractive market. So currently, right now, as we spoke earlier with Nicole's barrier of taxation policies, there are certain policies that aren't really creating an alluring market for the multinational corporations to come to Hungary. For them to really take it to the next level and to really make sure that we are bringing in this great international talent with multinational corporations, there needs to be a certain revision to certain policies that are currently happening in the field that would make it a little bit more enticing for them to come and partner with universities on the ground. And the next was the regional approach. So as we said earlier, the United States has adopted this regional approach that allows the different government agencies to adopt a smaller office that is purely devoted to innovation. However, in Hungary, we only have one central united office that is handling all the innovation for the entire country. That is kind of a daunting task, and obviously they're not going to be able to handle everything. So many individuals spoke of the desire to maybe break up that office, maybe have it a more regional approach underneath different government agencies. This would allow them to become more familiar with the information on the ground, with what technologies are being developed, as well as make a much more intimate relationship with the individuals because they're obviously more familiar with the work that they're doing. And the last one was sustainability and the stabilization of the field. So looking forward, what can we do to make sure that this field is being promoted in the future and that it actually is not only surviving, but also flourishing? The first is influx of private capital. As we said, obviously capital is a very big worry for both the United States and Hungary. So there is a critical role that private capital can play in the funding for technology, Because currently, right now, as it stands, universities might develop a technology and bring it to a certain point, and that's all the funding will allow it to happen. However, a private company might not see the marketability of that technology just quite yet. So what we need is an influx of private capital to fill this vacuum that's currently happening in the funding, to take it from that technology that's developed in the lab to really make sure that it can survive in the market and have a really big impact. And the next is small business development. While there is clearly a role for multinational organizations to play, Hungary can't overlook the role that small business has. This might have something to do with culture, something to do with certain fiscal policies. For instance, we spoke to one representative that said it takes about an annual salary of an engineer simply to register and to start a company. That isn't taken to any other costs as far as regulations, to field work, to finding an office. That is simply to just start a company. It's going to take an entire year's salary just to start and get it on paper. So obviously we need to maybe revisit this to make sure that we're promoting these small businesses, allowing them to spin off, allowing individuals to start their own work to really start this innovation. And then the last one is attracting international talent. Hungary, if they are serious about becoming a central hub for this innovation in the European Union, they need to make sure that they're attracting not only Hungarian talent with their engineers, which are very qualified, very resourceful, but making sure that we're pulling from Western Europe and as well from the United States as well. And some just general team reflections when we're looking back on this whole entire project in general. We wanted to kind of give our own insight to maybe some 3 big takeaways that we had. The first is every single thing we've talked about today has some element of human relationship. Everybody is wanting that communication to bring people together, and so we feel that there's obviously a key role that this could play, whether it's just as simple as an event. What something that could very easily do is host a biannual event that invites everybody in the field together to talk and discuss what they're currently working on. The next is promoting technology transfer. Don't be afraid to brag about what you're working on. Really promote the technology you're developing inside the university labs, and also promote what you're looking for as a private company in regards from the universities, and don't be afraid to stipulate what you are really desiring in the private field. Because the more upfront you are and the more honest you are, the universities can cater their research to exactly what you're working on. And the last was this changing perceptions, not only in the education field to make sure that we're producing the graduates of the future that are able to actually sustain this field and really help innovate, but additionally that entrepreneurship is a good thing, that we need to really revisit this issue that this risk-averse type of society might be a little bit more beneficial if we do take those risks and we jump in. So with that, we conclude our presentation. We look forward to any questions or comments you guys might have. You can clap if you want.
How can existing global corporations help?
Oh, very easily. For instance, they can, number one, come into Hungary and provide that private capital I was talking about. Simply by coming in there, right now there's a very specific market in Hungary. If new corporations can come in, software, maybe some more automotive industries, they can simply provide more capital into the field and thus promote those university labs, also bring in some labs in-house. And then the biggest thing is they can hire on the graduates. If they come into the actual country of Hungary, they're obviously going to need to hire local talent. And the more local talent they hire, the more individuals that would be interested in going into the field.
So they can create incentives for people.
Yes, they can create incentives for the individual as well as the entire field itself. So if there's more universities or there's more corporations, more universities are going to be able to partner with these corporations and to really be able to build up that capital to actually fund the projects.
Is there something of an interest of that kind with global or large corporate firms? Do you know of any?
I think so. For example, we interviewed Ericsson, which is a large multinational, and they talked about how they kind of instilled relationships early on, and they have ongoing relationships with certain universities, and they're always looking to pull from the largest talent groups and to really incorporate students into their mission as much as they can. So I think it's the large companies who are able to really collaborate with students early on that really seems to foster the relationship.
Entrepreneurship by itself, it just seems to me take a lot of effort and time. I just felt from a global perspective or from a corporate perspective, it would work much more easily.
Right, and we're not saying that it's purely rely on entrepreneurship. That's not the takeaway of this program at all. There's a role for both to play. Well, obviously, we see the role that small business can play and that needs to happen to really drive that innovation. Look at some companies that started. Google was started in a garage. That was technically small business at one point. So, but then additionally, we can't overlook the key role that multinational corporations play by bringing in those students, hiring the key talent, and partnering with universities.
Your client was the Hungarian Technology Transfer Office. I didn't get the right name. Am I correct?
That's going to be the right way, but
The National Research, Innovation, and Development Office.
Thank you. And your task then was to compare technology transfer as it's practiced in Hungary with the way it is practiced, if you will, in the States.
Mm-hmm.
Presumably, since your client is the Hungarian office, the purpose would be to provide lessons learned, if you will, from the American experience as it might be applicable to Hungary.
Mm-hmm.
Is that correct?
Correct.
What were those lessons, if you could pull out from your presentation the things that you would most like the Hungarian office to take, both do's and don'ts, from the way that technology transfer is approached in the United States?
I think the approaches were actually pretty similar across cultures. It was just the way that the systems were set up that interacted a little bit differently. So when we talked to certain professors or companies in the US, they really initiated the relationships in the same way and they were carried out in the same way. It was just that they had different areas of support along the way. So for instance, in the US, the FLC, which is the Federal Laboratory Consortium, that really serves as a hub of information. So we like to call it the Google search of technology transfer, where if a company is working on a specific project, they can call the FLC and say, hey, I need like a small motor device for this project I'm working on. Do you know of a university who's researching that? And then the central person there can really connect them with who they might want to get in touch with. Whereas I don't think we're seeing that happen as much from that specific office that we're working with.
And some other key takeaways were clearly the centralized versus decentralized approach. Hungary, you see a very centralized approach where it's just one office that's responsible for everything, whereas in the American model, you see that we have a regional approach where EPA, NSA, you name it, they have their own offices that are purely designed just to work on innovation. So that was a key takeaway, was that they are willing to, or the United States is able to break up that kind of approach to make it a little bit more personable. And then also the big thing with the supporting structure with its taxation policies and being able to support those small business growth, and as well as large corporates being able to donate their research to universities. The United States is very good at making sure the government is aiming towards working towards those small to medium enterprises, whereas Hungary is a little bit more, they don't have that support for them. They're still taxing with the VAT tax, for instance, they're still taxing any type of collaboration that's happening. So that was obviously another key takeaway. Some things that might not have been done as well as the consistency of funding here. There's sometimes that priorities shift, whether it be someone else is different in the White House, Congress might change hands, and so the idea of what they should be funding changes. Whereas in Hungary, that seems that also is a similar problem, but that's a major takeaway that should change.
In the back here, the question.
In your, I'm sorry, in your research concerning the barriers to technology transfer, did you run across the requirement that the U.S. has for obtaining licenses to transfer certain kinds of sensitive technology?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just curious as to whether the EU has such a requirement to transfer certain kinds of technology, or whether obtaining export licenses is a real barrier.
So in a lot of our US interviews actually mentioned patents or licensing, and that wasn't something that we really heard from the Hungarian side. Specifically in the government in the US, they look to license any of their ideas to small businesses first. But they didn't really go into depth over certain barriers that they were encountering over that. And I know, Nicole, you have a section in the paper that talks about the patents.
Yeah, so really it is a barrier in the US, especially when they're collaborating. So it's who gets the license? Is it the researchers? Is it the company who had the initial idea first? But in Hungary, that hasn't been an issue thus far. We did put in our paper as something that they should keep an eye out for, because this is something that can develop as their tech transfer industry develops, but as of for now, we haven't seen anything. And we didn't go in depth to looking at the EU in general and what regulations they have.
I was just wondering if you had a section in the beginning that maybe is not here, about some comparative facts, because there are data series and rankings and so on whether it's ease of starting a business, strength of intellectual property protection, extent of angel investing or venture capital investing, you know, to have some idea of where Hungary is at and what would be a reasonable goal to achieve, because the US is, you know, a complete monster compared to Hungary. So maybe there is somebody of equivalent size or so that is a few steps ahead, and there are some achievables, but I was just wondering whether you did any of that.
We didn't, mostly in our comparison, it's how the system is structured for technology transfer, but I think that is a really good idea and something that we could easily incorporate before we submit the final product.
Yes, as you probably know, there's a big literature on technology cluster formation in the United States, and the classic example is Silicon Valley and the role of Stanford University and UC Berkeley in terms of university industry linkages, and then MIT, Harvard in biomedical technology, and the University of Minnesota in the medical device cluster around the Twin Cities. In your interactions with CEU and other universities in Hungary, and do you see the sort of structure in terms of an administrative and incentive structure that would actually encourage professors who are developing cutting-edge technologies to commercialize those technologies?
Yeah, so we did, in the eastern part of Hungary, that's where Audi is, the big car company, and they partnership directly with a university, so much so that they actually sponsor a professor in the university for technology transfer. So yeah, we do see that as well working in Hungary, as in there are bubbles as well.
But obviously it's in the early formation, so they're still trying to get the administration to catch up with really supporting these professors that are working on this really cutting-edge technology. And so we talked to some experts in the field that felt that there wasn't that much support quite yet. It was coming, and the idea was kind of changing, but still the university administration isn't that quick to fund those labs or those technology transfer initiatives. But it's slowly moving towards that point. It just needs just a kickstart towards to get to that point where we're seeing, you know, incentives for professors to dedicate purely to research, or for them to partner exclusively with one company.
You'd also mentioned the European Union's current transfer to structural and cohesion funds, and particularly the Horizon 2020 program. And where do you see Hungary fitting into that scenario? Or to put it in which sectors or industries do you see Hungary enjoying a comparative advantage?
Yeah. Number one is automotive, because they're very big with Audi being there. A lot of the universities have dedicated a lot of their time towards automotive research, whether it be software that helps run the car, or different patents that might help with the actual structure of the car. And then also, again, with medical equipment. There's Viking University over there that is really good at developing some cutting-edge medical devices that are in the field. So relatively, I would say those are the two fields that they're really specializing in right now. And then I think there is some role for software to play, especially with Ericsson being there. Ericsson's really looking for some key software players. So the individuals that are going to have the most success are the ones, like I said earlier, the ones with the multinational corporations that are there, able to really provide the funds, because currently the government isn't providing to the level of funds that universities is going to be successful just with the government funds. They need that large corporate donor, that large corporate partner that's going to come in and donate a university labs purely for that innovation research. So those are the three kind of key areas that I see it developing in. Or we see it developing in, excuse me. Yeah.
Did you see a difference of approach vis-a-vis governmental relations between private and public universities?
So I know in the US there is a difference. I know public have more restrictions on how they can collaborate versus private, who kind of have free will to do what they like. In Hungary, we didn't see any of these barriers at all.
So how many private universities are in How many private universities are?
I don't think we encountered any in our search.
We
So
don't,
how
we don't, we
many-
don't only with public universities with our interviews,
CEU.
Oh, they are.
It's around 15, 10, 15.
10, 15.
Out of how many?
Out of around 100, I would say.
Through what structures and mechanisms do the three players, academics, businesses, and government, actually implement these technology transfers? Are there contracts? Are there joint ventures? Are there, how do they structure, and are they the same or different in the United States versus Hungary?
I think most times we saw that there was definitely a contract in place, and participants spoke on how it's easier to execute the contract if you've been in the relationship for a long time, or if you're dealing with, again, the public universities in the US, you have a harder time kind of putting the terms of the contract in place. Does anybody else have?
Yeah. For the most part, it was contracts
Yeah.
that we heard of.
And in the United States, I felt like there was more contractual approach, whereas in Hungary there were some joint ventures, whereas Ericsson would actually join with a particular university to specifically design a software, or Audi specifically partnered with the university to develop a software, and they would develop it together. They would partner by using their private funds as well as some in-house technology that they might have. I believe that was in Star Labs, not Star Labs, National Instrument Labs is a good example of the university would provide the actual space for them to come in and conduct their research. So it's an actually really interesting partnership where the university gave them basically the labs and the capacity to carry out their research, but then you actually had industry experts coming in and working with the students side by side to develop these initiatives or this innovation.
Thank you all very much. We have to stop now. Thank you to the team.
Thank you guys.